You've seen the guy that goes around New York and says how much you pay for rent. You've seen the guy take job interviews on Zoom and he just acts wild. You've got even this guy who sings songs on Hinge, like as a voice note. He's now mega famous.
The rise of TikTok stars.
Generally, I disagree because we definitely overestimate how much consumers are going to care.
I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care.
Let me tell you
We don't care.
Can I play devil's advocate?
Scary. I think we're now going to see a huge number of these experiments. The fact that you can kind of tell it's ChatGPT is a godsend, otherwise we're in trouble.
Memes and Machines, episode 4. Memes and Machines is a podcast for marketeers, entrepreneurs, or anyone that's really interested in the attention economy. It's with myself, Oliver Yonchev, and my co-host, Catty, Catman, Cathal. What did we talk about today? Well, we covered a lot. I asked Catty the best campaign that never happened for him and why it was so great. We talk about creative tactics, things that brands should do more of. We speak a little bit about personal brands. Personal brand has become a dirty word, but is it? That's a question. We discuss algorithms, reach is being killed, why? We talk about automation bots, the automation apocalypse. Our world is going to be ruined by bots. And then we conclude with a controversy of the week, which is the Metaverse dead? Wow. Catman, good to see you. Welcome back on home soil. How's the last week been?
It's been great, mate. Like you said, it's been fun listening to everyone complain about the weather, rather than try and enjoy it. Final 1 week of the year, and so I think I timed it well.
Yeah, good man. Good man. Well, let's kick off, right? I want to kick off with a big topic. In marketing, we are always coming up with ideas, concepts, campaigns, and some of them live and go on to achieve great things, but there are many great ideas that never do. So I'm going to ask you a big question. What is the best campaign that never happened for you, and why was it so great?
Yeah, best campaign from the ideas graveyard. Probably has to be an idea we had for a company called, actually I won't say the company, an idea for a non-dairy milk alternative brand that we were trying to launch in the US. And obviously it's a pretty saturated market, very busy. And so we were tasked with how do we stand out? How do we create something which makes us kind of ahead of the competitors in terms of awareness? And so we had the idea of launching a children's book. And the children's book was essentially a story of Daisy the cow. And in the story, it basically takes the reader through the journey that a dairy cow takes as they are being, quote unquote, exploited for their milk. So the book started very kind of friendly and warm. Daisy the cow, she's grazing, she's having a nice day. And then all of a sudden, Daisy the cow is captured by her farmers. She is forcibly attached to one of the milking machines, and she is extracted for her milk with very kind of graphic imagery. And the whole idea being that when people read this children's book, they think they're kind of being taken on this one route, which is very kind of friendly, very nice. And all of a sudden it takes a dark turn. And obviously the illustrations being very kind of juvenile, it has that really shocking juxtaposition. And it's designed to shock people. It's designed to kind of give people a real taste of reality of what the world is like for dairy cows, and obviously shine a bad light on the dairy industry as a whole, which I think is one of the lesser covered industries when it comes to kind of animal welfare. And the idea was to create this book, send it to influencers, and the influencers would post about it, obviously, in their shock, but also then kind of talk about the product. And yeah, we actually mocked up the book. I thought it came out really well. And the brand wasn't quite brave enough to go with it. It was, I think, a little too risky. And if I remember correctly, we probably shopped it around to a number of other non-dairy milk alternative brands, and nobody bit. But I think if you're trying to launch in a new market and you want to do something that really shocks and stands out, and you want to generate earned media, you want to generate people talking about it, that's the kind of thing you have to do. So it's disappointing, but another idea for the black book, I guess.
Allegedly, it was shopped around. I remember this really well, and I think there's some important context that needs layering in. So there were a couple of variables at play here. I remember they didn't have a big budget, and if you don't have a big budget, you better get hella creative. I think you dial up all the factors you would traditionally, meaning you have to be anchored to a much stronger emotion. The next thing I think that was really important, and this is probably one of the it's been a long time, so I'm going to remind you of this. But one of the reasons why it was so good was that the creators were getting an opportunity to save a dairy cow at the end of the book and adopt a cow, take them out of the system. And then there's this whole layer of context that this milk alternative brand were a purpose-driven brand. They were known for making political statements or being anchored to activism as part of their commitment to their audience. So there were like a number of factors where this may seem a little extreme. And the creative execution was all about how do we get more people to share something when we didn't have a budget. Well, what we had to do is like gift people things that they wouldn't expect, make it hyper personal and make it controversial. And the idea was that it would be obviously picked up. We were reverse engineering the headlines. The headlines were like, influencers save cows from the dairy industry, blah, 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 blah. So I do remember it being very good. And allegedly, we may have shopped this to one other alternative milk brand that still didn't take it. But if any milk brands are listening, I do think it was a killer idea.
Yeah, I think exactly that. I know that it would have driven people to share it. And I think it could have been a scenario where we wouldn't have had to pay the influencers, right? If we just sent it as a gifting activation. That's one way of doing influencer gifting where you're not actually contracting specific influencers. You just send it out to a high volume of people and hope that a large percentage of them convert and post. I think the idea being that they would have been a much higher chance when it's something like that. It's something that's so visceral and so memorable that you just want to share it with your audience. Very disappointing, but we move.
Can I play devil's advocate just for the context of playing this out on this idea? Because I love that idea. I understood the context. I knew how on point it was to the brief.
Yeah.
But do you think it is possible in the advertising industry that we overcomplicate and over-romanticize campaigns with too many moving parts? And actually, if you take a step back and just put yourselves in the eyes of a viewer on social media, is this going to connect with me in a way, or is it too abstract?
I think sometimes we definitely overestimate how much consumers are going to care about what a brand has to say. But no, I'd say generally I disagree, because you only have a few seconds to connect with somebody online before they're moving on to the next ad. They're probably seeing, we're seeing the number of ads we see every day has probably increased tenfold over the last 20 years or so. And so when you have such a small window of opportunity, you have to do something that stands out. You have to do something that sticks and is memorable, even if it's 1% more memorable. Otherwise, you're just going to be lost in the sea of brand noise that you see every day. And so if you have, 10% more chance that comes from creativity, which comes from a big campaign, that's, I think, what marketers are being paid for these days, is what is that like 5% more memorable thing I can do? And then I have just like a slightly better chance of not being the 15th thing that person has forgotten about today.
Indifference is where marketing goes to die. And I think that embodies that. And you made a good point there, actually, of the role of marketeers today. I think being an outside party often means you have permission to play in spaces that maybe a brand or a brand manager or a marketing director may not feel comfortable, but probably has the ambition and dare or willingness to do. I want to segue a little on this topic, and I want to stay on creativity because I think it's important. Have you noticed creative tactics that are inherently social? So behaviors that we all adopt, whether you're a content creator or you're just you're the silent majority. Are there tactics that brands don't do enough of? And the reason I ask is I saw a campaign from Hyundai where they paid a creator that made cake. I think he made chocolate or cake. And then they paid another creator to react to that person in a satirical, humorous way, to react to the guy making cake to promote the new car. And I thought it was really interesting because reaction content, the internet is filled with it. You can't scroll down a Reels feed, or certainly can't go into TikTok without seeing people react to things that are happening in the world or other videos. And actually, if you think of the barrier to create that type of content, it's really low. Should brands be doing things like that? And are there other tactics that brands should do more of?
I think that the point that kind of encapsulates that is that brands should behave more like creators. And I actually think one of the biggest things that prevents brands from being creative and like you said, jumping on the platform features that they may not usually jump on is they put too much structure and they have too many kind of guardrails. So they'll have these like content calendars they have to adhere to. They have like weekly posting plans. I have to post this thing every Monday and this thing every Wednesday. When you're a creator, you don't have that. You're forced to start with a blank canvas every single day. And what that does is it means that you can be very agile, and a creator will see a new feature, like they'll see the duet feature on TikTok, or they'll see, like you said, maybe the comment, the feature where you can create a video that reacts to a comment. These like small little features they kind of jump on. As a creator, you're forced to do that. You're forced to stay on top of things and try new things and see what works for your audience. As a brand, because they have these guardrails, they have this structure in place, they actually don't have any time to do that. And they end up just posting the same thing they post every single week. And they're not behaving like a creator. And as a result, they don't have this kind of fluidity and the ability to start from scratch every single day. And just in general, I think what I see brands don't do enough, like you said, is work with people who create, work with creators who can create content for their brand as if they are a consumer, because that's just going to convert better. People are going to perform better. The content is going to perform better. And I think from hiring within their community is also something I don't see enough. So finding people, identifying people, I think you mentioned it last week, who can create content for your brand, again, as if you are a creator. And that's going to perform better every single time. And so I think actually removing a lot of the guardrails that hold brands back, I think is super powerful.
I have a ton of empathy because I agree on one hand, but I also recognize the consequences of getting it wrong, right? And I'll give you one example. This goes back several years, but we once had a disgruntled employee that was responsible for a big brand page, and then said something like obscene on their way out on a big brand. Luckily that didn't turn into anything, but you can see when the stakes are so high, when you've got millions of customers, this idea that someone without an approval process, and there obviously has to be, but I've got to assume we can get to some utopia where we can have planned reactivity. We can have safe spaces where the approval processes are maybe are less stringent. We used to do this kind of reactive piece where we said we'd come up with an idea as an agency. We'd have a 2-hour turnaround. So it'd happen in the world. We'd send it via WhatsApp. We'd give the context on why it would work. They said yes or no, and that was permission to go, which was a bypass of all the other content planning cycles that you would typically do. And that worked really well. And you're right, probably our greatest moments in terms of getting, virality or disproportionate reach was always those kind of reactive, off the cuff, it happened in the world and we were one of the first to market. So yeah, I do have empathy for brands, and I wish more companies behave that way. What is interesting though, I will say, we've seen it on Twitter. Brands seem to have permission to behave in a certain way on Twitter or X, whatever we want to call it, in a way that they haven't, or they don't on other platforms. What do you think of? Do you think we are going to see a future where all platforms adhere to kind of we're going to be a personality, we're going to have a persona, and we're going to give our social media teams permission?
I think that it's almost like they have no choice, right? I think that you're seeing brands adopt, especially on Twitter, a much more colloquial, human tone of voice. A lot of the times they're surfacing the person running the account almost like a character. And you're starting to build, let the audience build a relationship with these people. They'll get very meta and they'll talk about, oh, my boss didn't let me post this. It's all very kind of like self-referential. And that is happening because before they were getting no reach, when they were posting through a kind of corporate tone of voice and through a very guidelined way of speaking, they just weren't getting any engagement. And so we need people to see our posts, we need people to see our messaging, we have to adopt a new tone of voice. And so it's almost like their hands are being forced. I think Shopify were one of the first to really adopt this. They what I find really interesting about Shopify is they have their tagline on their Twitter bio is the sassy entrepreneurship company. And what's interesting to me there is they actually have a new tagline just for their Twitter, right? That's not a tagline you see anywhere else on any of their service areas. Mm-hmm. So brands are happy to actually adopt a whole new messaging on certain social platforms in order to keep up. And McDonald's are another one. They've completely adopted this.
Yeah, I love that philosophy because it says two things. It means as an organization, you've let go of your ego. You have to show up in the exact same way with the same language on every channel. And they have got addicted to engagement. This idea, once you get a couple of wins internally, it can get hell of addictive.
Exactly. And I think TikTok was also the probably the kind of ultimate example of this, right? Where not only were brands now forcing to be more humorous and a bit more reactive, but now they were actually having to put people front and center. We saw it with Duolingo, again, a case study that's been covered a lot. Mm-hmm. Did an incredible job of completely humanizing their content, behaving like a creator, giving a senior social media manager complete creative control to do what they want with the account. And as a result, had insane returns, had the most incredible results on their content, because they completely dropped all of the brand guidelines and approached it purely from a creative perspective.
Yeah, and not just in their social content. In their latest earnings report, where they bet all market expectations, they literally cited social media and their organic activity as the catalyst for driving new users, their revenues and such. And wow. What started probably as a thought experiment within the walls that was really successful, ended up being a big part and a core focus of their entire marketing strategy. It does make me think a little. What I'm seeing more broadly from, I think you said this earlier, we should look to creators for where we are headed. How are creators behaving on platform? Who are getting the advantages on social media? And when I look at creators now, I'm noticing this thing where people just pick a theme that they become known for. And these are some really obscure themes, and they just rinse and repeat. You've seen the guy that goes around New York and says, how much do you pay for rent? And then he goes, views their apartment. He's now mega famous, basically just doing A-list celebrities from this, what started as this novel feature. You can go to the other extreme. There's a guy during COVID would take job interviews on Zoom, and he'd just act wild and irreverent and say dumb, crazy stuff. Yeah. You've got even, dating culture. You've got this guy who sings people sings songs on Hinge, like as a voice note, and puts their name in the song, and that's become his whole identity. I think we're going to see more and more brands do a Duolingo with the owl and just pick a lane and pick a channel, and that then they become fully content creators in many respects.
If you and the really interesting thing there is, like we're saying, if you think about how a creator stumbled across that format that really worked for them, they didn't sit in meetings and brainstorm and then create decks and then get approval to do that idea. That was the 10th different thing they tried. They probably tried other things, it didn't work, nothing was landing, and they eventually stumble across this one video that goes viral, and then they jump on that idea and they execute it 1,000 times over. But in order to get to that idea that goes viral, they have to try a bunch of other different things that don't work. I think that's where brands get it wrong, is that they have these crazy long approval processes which slow down any kind of iterative creativity and prevent you from finding that format that works for you and that you can execute 1,000,000 times over. And so, yeah, you just need to
say it louder. Say
I
it
mean, it's
louder,
like,
Catman.
it's an ideal world, right? Like, obviously, guidelines exist for a reason, and it's very difficult for brands to behave like that. But the Duolingo one is a good example where everybody likes to break down that case study retrospectively and talk about their strategy. This was Duolingo's TikTok strategy. There probably actually wasn't any strategy involved. They probably just gave the TikTok account to somebody who knew TikTok and said, post whatever you like. And they posted stuff and it worked. There wasn't this I don't think a deck was produced by that creator. I might be wrong. And it was, presented to senior leaders. They probably just said, give it a go and see what works. So I think just being able to tinker and try things on social media is how you win, really.
The folklore of advertising, the stories we tell in retrospect. There was part of me always wanted Netflix and chill to be like a effort of some marketing team or some advertising agency that carefully orchestrated culture in a way that created the term Netflix and chill. I know this not to be true. To your point, most outlier successes are either completely random. They're certainly not planned. But I do think there is a strategy in understanding what you deploy all your energy against. And what was the drink a while back where there was that like viral moment with a Fleetwood Mac song? Was it Ocean Drive? It was some like cranberry
Ocean
drink.
Spray.
Ocean Spray. They had their moment where there was this, the context of the world was, I think we were in COVID. It was quite a dark time. There was misery on TV. And you've just got this guy just living free, skateboarding, drinking his Ocean Spray. And it was a beautiful moment and it connected with everybody. But then what Ocean Spray did is they engaged with that individual for weeks on weeks, and it became this cult moment. So although that was never intentional, they reacted in the right way. And I remember us talking about this. What was quite smart, they didn't respond for like immediately. They just showed up in the right way. I think there was about a 3-day delay when everyone's going, why aren't the social media team like flippantly responding to this? But I think they waited 2 or 3 days. It was a really good example.
Do you think you can engineer virality?
Yes.
How?
Do you want me to extrapolate? I think all virality shares a couple of principles and traits. So I think first and foremost, virality is always attached to culture. It's always attached to a bigger story than the story itself. So if you're a product, you are always attached to something bigger. I think that in part. I think virality always has an emotional hook. And when we say emotional hook, we often think of like fear and anger, the most extreme emotions, but emotion can be laughter. It can be nostalgia. It's always attached to something that we feel. And then the third bit is embedded within the concept itself or the idea is distribution. You enlightened me to this many years ago, the idea that the best concepts on social media have distribution within them. So I think, do I think there's an exact formula or you can guarantee virality? Of course not. That'd be silly. By definition, that isn't what virality is. But I do think if you apply certain principles, luck will work with you and not against you. And that's how we've always thought about the response of how do we make this message go further.
Yeah, I agree. You can increase the chances heavily that something will go viral by
Yes.
tweaking the concept to have these components. Virality itself, like you said, it's probably more random. It's very difficult to predict, but if you really study why things go viral, I think there's 3 points you said there are pretty spot on. Then absolutely you can increase the chance. And as long as you have more shots on goal as a brand, you'll probably get there.
Yeah, I agree. I want to conclude on this segment by talking about a dirty word. I'm going to get like really naughty. I'm going to say personal brand. The dirty word that is personal brand. So I wrote down a note a couple of months ago because I saw a job ad from the UK government that was promoting a new job title, and it was basically a content creator or a personal brand manager for the government, for Rishi Sunak. And then since that time, I've seen Rishi show up every Friday with these like meme-infused sort of government updates. We went to this person, we achieved this, these kind of I'm going to celebrate and brag, but in a really social first format, which I find quite interesting. How do you feel, A, about personal brand and the dirty word that it may have become? And B, how do you feel about our politicians using personal brand in, I suppose, the more modern sense as part of a tactic to connect with voters?
I think we have Donald Trump to thank for that. I think he showed the world how by building a personal brand, you create your own distribution channel. Donald Trump basically built his presidency off Twitter and through social media. He's one of the highest ever spenders on Facebook ads for that 2020 campaign. And as a result, I think completely changed the way politicians think about distribution. And they now understand and see the power of social media. I think the problem is when you hire someone to build that brand for you, you're always a step removed from the content you're creating. And I don't know if it hits as closely as Donald Trump jumping on his laptop at the end of the day and typing something in all caps. I think people really appreciated that, and for all the bad things to say about him
or not,
or not, I think that actually for politics, it changed the way people thought about connecting with politicians, and it was actually for a lot of people a breath of fresh air to feel like they could have this direct line to the leader of the country, and it's becoming an inevitability. I think personal brand building. I think people are now seeing the powers of owning your audience. It's opening up huge opportunities for people. I think it takes people further in their careers. I think it helps them stand out. I think the dangerous thing that might happen though is that people are conflating having a personal brand with being a competent operator, which isn't the case. Some of the best people you ever work with, some of the best, most talented people in their career, some of the people who have achieved the most, have zero social media presence. And I think that should also be a celebrated choice for a lot of people, that it isn't a necessity. You can still be an incredible executor and not want to launch a podcast like we are. And so, I think it's been interesting to see the rise of it. And it's becoming more and more ubiquitous, but I think why not? I think people should have the empowerment and the platforms to share their ideas and share their beliefs.
You raise a good point about Trump in a number of ways, because you're right. Owning the distribution, we're seeing this in the current American election now, not about necessarily owning the distribution, but thinking of spaces in which you can amplify your story and self-promote. You're seeing a lot of the candidates now be heavy on the podcast circuit. So they're circulating the left-leaning podcasts, the right-leaning podcasts, which are in turn often YouTube channels and YouTube shows. And they're gaining great traction by cutting out the gatekeepers, which were the establishment. And that's effectively what Trump was. He was the anti-establishment that was there to clean the swamp in his inflammatory, way. And I think that led a new era of politics. I don't necessarily think it to be a good thing, if I'm being brutally honest. I think this new era of politics, I think it's here now. But I do remember a time when people were there was a little more integrity. And the problem with, it being a battle of attention, it's where do we draw the line? I think we've taken these lines as far as they could possibly go already, right? But it's probably only going to go further if you think of the extremes. And that's an inherent challenge when our information is being geared, or when algorithms are gearing our lives, information that reaches us is usually a little more extreme. But just going back to the point on kind of personal brand, I think personal brand as a word has been hijacked by people that are trying to grow a social following. And I think they're very different things. What you described there is some of the best people you work with don't do social media. Yeah, that's great. They just have a limited reputation. It's within the confines of people that connect with them and work with them. I think we are seeing more and more this glorification of people with a social following and professional credentials. I remember one time being really excited about hiring a creative in the US team. And the first person I went to, I was like, I want to hire a content creator. I really admire the way this guy tweets. And he's got all these social media managers that follow him. And I was like, I'd love to meet him. And then when I met him, I was so underwhelmed. I was so underwhelmed. And then I remember saying to you, I was like, I think this is a great idea to hire this guy. And you said satirically, well, he's spending a lot of time tweeting all day. maybe not doing the client work, but he's sat there tweeting. So yeah, I understand the values, and I've been a big benefactor. I started creating, I suppose, putting my ideas into the world and creating content about 18 months ago now. And since then, it's been a huge value add to the business, to Flight Story. It's been a huge value add to me personally, because I have been forced, and I say forced, not gun to head, but forced out of curiosity and a need, and let's call it a content mandate. I've been forced to continue and to fall back in love with learning new things week on week. And also, I've been able to really spend the time to understand my ideas. When you have an idea, until you write it down or say it out loud, it's just this fleeting thought of mush that just, bounces around your own head. The minute you speak it on a camera, the minute you write it down, it suddenly starts to crystallize it. And then if you put it out into the world, you receive feedback. And with that feedback, you have two choices. You can either learn something, or you can evolve your idea. Or you can have more resolve, right? You have a few choices. You have more resolve in your own idea. So I've got a tremendous amount of value out of, I suppose, content creating for the last 18 months. So I know many others would do the same.
Absolutely. And the tools that are available now are making it much easier. I think in the past, it was a huge commitment for your time, and you almost had to teach yourself video editing. You had to teach yourself a huge number of skills, which actually you don't really, it's getting easier. There are tools available now which make it possible for one person to do it. I think what I will say is, my view on personal brand building is, it really depends what your goals are at that moment and where you are in your career. I think for a lot of people, if you are, let's say, just starting a business, you're trying to get it off the ground, you've got a million priorities. If it is the 10% of the time you spend on personal brand building actually better spent on your business, or actually better spent on yourself, on doing the work and getting yourself to a place where you can eventually then spend time creating content and having something to say. I think what's happening is so many people now are creating content from day one, and they're very quickly running out of things to say. And I see it a lot on Twitter, and I see it a lot on LinkedIn, where I think you've said this in the past. You see people who are giving long-term career advice from perspectives where they haven't actually been able to execute or had those experiences themselves yet. And the content eventually ends up just feeling kind of boilerplate. It ends up feeling just like a copy and paste from something they've read. And you get a lot of this kind of empty, vapid content. And they don't really have that traction that they need, or that they get out of creating that content. And so my advice would always be to try and do the work first, and then you'll end up having a lot more to say. You'll end up having a lot more interesting and unique perspectives on the work that you do.
Devil's advocate, though, the best time to start anything is yesterday. The next best time is today. Yeah, so there's part of me goes, although I agree with you, it's about priorities, and if you are compromising your business or your entrepreneurial journey or your team or your ability to learn other things, I think you just have to find a system that is complementary. The reason we are doing a marketing podcast is because we work in marketing. There are other things I care about that I have opinions and ideas on, but I'm not doing a podcast around it. So that would be a contradiction to me, because it would steal from one area that I, need to commit the time to in order to give to another. I think the secret is finding the harmony between the two.
Right. Yeah, I agree. It's like a sliding scale.
Absolutely. Dude, right, let's talk about bots, the machines. I've been seeing this a lot on X, that the algorithm is killing reach. I'm seeing this all the time. It's people whining and whining that they're no longer getting the reach. I'm seeing it on LinkedIn. People saying my reach has been killed. What is happening with the algorithms right now?
One good way to think about this is just to replace the word algorithm with audience. And so when you say the algorithm doesn't like my content, it actually means your audience probably doesn't like your content. What is happening with these platforms as they develop is what the algorithm is doing all the time, very simply, when it changes, when it shifts, it is trying to keep people on the platform. It's trying to keep people who use these platforms on there longer. And to do that, it will show your audience, it will show people content that they are more likely to engage with for longer periods of time. And so you're seeing that with Twitter now. It's becoming more algorithmically heavy. It's becoming more reliant on the algorithm. You're seeing it with LinkedIn as well. And all these platforms are doing are servicing the top 1% of content and starting to kill the reach of the bottom 90%, 99%. And to prevent your reach from being killed, you just have to create content, which is better, which keeps your audience around for longer. I'm seeing it with Twitter. We have a strategy now of bangers only, we call it. So only post tweets that we think could have a chance of banging, and actually kill everything else. Because if you start to do posts which don't get good reach, we've actually decreased the number of times we post on Twitter to focus purely on, let's put all of our energy into posts which we think could be seen by a lot of people, could get a lot of reach. I think that's just one big change we've made. But also we need to spend a lot of time on
that. Okay.
Yep.
Just sorry, we've got a little delay here, but what I want to interrogate that. What is a banger of a post for you? Talk me through your methodology.
A banger of a post. So we are, the kind of content we're creating is, educational stuff for developers. And an example might be that we have this new, very complicated technical concept, which has been, started to make its way in the developer community. And we're going to spend a day creating a huge Twitter thread which breaks down everything the developers need to know. So almost think of it like a long form blog post. And that post might take us a day to create. We put a lot of love into it. We create diagrams. We go into detail onto that particular technical concept. And we know that post alone is going to be used as a resource within the developer community. The community is going to share it with each other. They're going to post about it being, this is the place you need to read to learn about this concept. We know it's much better spending all of our energy on that one post than posting 5 different things about that concept or 5 different other posts, right? So actually,
Can
like
I ask a question on
concentrating.
that?
Yeah,
So, would you say, if I want to extrapolate from this idea that you're now posting less,
yeah.
you're being a lot more thoughtful and intentional and putting the effort and energy into each piece of content or each concept or each campaign, do you think the days of volume content are over now? And quality is going to reign, particularly when we consider that content is getting more commoditized with the ability to use ChatGPT as a writing aid or a writer, the ability to use generative AI tools to create videos and do things. Content has been commoditized, is increasingly so. Do you think we're now moving into an era where quality really matters?
That's definitely how it feels. And that is because, Twitter is introducing the For You tab, right? And you are just seeing less. You're not seeing the real time updates that we used to see and that's where volume really favored, because you were rewarded for posting stuff in real time, for posting high volumes, like let's post 100 times a day and then people will see you consistently. Right now people are going straight to the For You feed, and the 50 things you posted that day aren't being shown there. The one thing you did post which got 200 likes, that's being shown there. And so you need to spend all your time and energy thinking about, how do I get 200 likes? And it's a balance, because in order to get 200 likes you need to post a lot, because you need to try things and you need to get feedback, you need to iterate. But like similar to we were saying earlier, once you find a format that works, it's about doubling down and producing a large number of those kind of posts. But yeah, the meta is always changing, and so like staying on top of that is the most important thing. Understanding what kind of formats work. Like right now, Twitter is pushing video heavily, so people are now starting to experiment with, how can I use video differently on the platform. It's something that we're doing constantly. Like for example, a very small change we've made is our videos that used to perform the best on Twitter were always square, 1:1 aspect ratio. Those are the things that are always performing best. That changed. We started to notice that whenever we posted those square videos, it wasn't performing very well. Now, when we post 16:9, which is a kind of more landscape video, that's what's performing better. I don't know why that is. I can't tell you specifically why that's happening, but we know it is happening. And so it's just about like constantly knowing and being on top of what are the small little nuances that for some reason Twitter is preferring.
Yeah, so to me, I think there's a couple of behaviors that marketeers need to take away, and this is not new. This has been the case where you operate in a field that changes daily. But I think what I'm gathering from what you're saying is you need to be a lot more ruthless in cutting formats that don't work or
Yeah.
low ROI content. Anything that isn't, you notice a theme, a particular format, a type of topic that isn't working, just kill it. The next then is spend more time in trying to create something that's really packed with value or very distinctive. In a commoditized content world, you need to stand out somehow. And I think a good step in doing that is just packing anything you produce with lots of value. And then I suppose the third point I'm taking from this is you need a lot of insight on a regular basis within your content teams or your marketing teams more broadly. So this idea where most functions wait for their monthly report to say, here's the data, this was the top performing thing, this is the lowest performing thing. That level and cadence of intelligence and insight is probably not helpful at the pace that social media changes.
Exactly. You need people who are screenshotting each post and saying, this is why we think this worked, this is why this didn't. They're thinking about things in real time. They're obsessed with the data on like a daily level. I think that's a really good summary.
Great. Other thing I want to pick on this week, and this is, again, I'm going a little conspiracy theorist here, but I keep noticing people commenting on my content that are basically robots. They sound like ChatGPT. So time and time again, I'm getting people commenting, and verbatim, they're like taking phrases out of the written text and just repeating it back, but in the most robotic, automated way. And this has led me to speculate that people are using chatbots to comment on people's posts in environments like LinkedIn for the reason that there are two ways to be visible and grow an audience. One is create content and reach people. The other is write comments on other people's content to introduce their audience to you. So I'm starting to notice this a lot, and I think more and more people are doing it. So this leads me, whether I'm right or wrong, this leads me to a big question. How do we use bots in marketing to not piss people off, but not piss people off? How do we use automation without frustrating people?
It's a great question. It's scary. I think we're going to see more and more of this, right? It's as long as, LinkedIn is a very powerful lead gen audience building tool, we're now going to see a huge number of these experiments. I think right now it's a great thing that you are able to spot them, right? Like the fact that you can kind of tell it's ChatGPT is, in my eyes, a godsend. Otherwise, we're in trouble. And I think the quality just isn't quite there yet. We're still missing that like ability for these things to sound truly human and offer an idea or a thought which feels like it came from a place of organic thought. We're just not quite there yet. The scary thing is that one day we will be, and then all of a sudden, maybe every single comment you read will be AI generated. The platforms actually really reward comments. I think that's one of the problems here, right? Where LinkedIn, it's heavily rewarded. Twitter, it's heavily rewarded. People can get a lot of reach by being one of the first people to reply to a big account, and so you're just going to see this kind of AI content creation heavily. I think to use bots not to piss people off. I think it has to.
Where do you start?
Good question. I think there are I can only see it right now in a world where it improves workflows and increases the productivity of content creation. I think there's nothing really wrong there. If you're able to help someone get from 0 to 1, I think that's where bots are really powerful to help you kind of break that blank page problem for brands creating content. I think it's really great. I think it can help you get started on content creation. But I think people are always going to want that like human touch right now. I don't think we're there yet where people are going to be comfortable reading something from a robot.
I'm going to say I agree with you to an extent, but I'm going to go a step further. I think it's horrendous. The reason being is I'm very in tune. I know these tools exist. 99.9% of people don't.
Yeah.
So most people aren't realizing they're interacting with a bot. And to your point, give it a year, 2 years, it's probably going to be indistinguishable from the average blurb that we see on the internet, right? It's going to be indistinguishable. So even a very in-tune eye is not going to be able to do this. And I remember I watched a video where someone was talking about the sales process is going to be completely revolutionized by AI. I believe that to be true, but I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. I have a philosophy. If you're going to send me an automated bot that if I don't respond in 2 days reminds me of a prompt, it's very formulaic right now, these sales agents that are being used. If you can't be bothered to send me a message, I certainly can't be bothered to respond to you, right?
Yeah.
Like that has to be the bare minimum that we all expect of one another. So I have probably a stronger allergic reaction to bots than most. But I do just see, to your point, this problem exacerbating, and I don't see a solution. I don't see a solution.
Our CEO believes that in the future, 99% of the content you read will be AI. He truly believes that. He believes that every creator will have AIs trained on their thoughts, their voice, their writing, and they will have content written for them. He believes pretty much all brands will use it. He believes the internet will just be AI generated content. controlled by people, but that's where he believes it's going. And you're right. I don't know if there is a way to stop that. I think there may be technology which can detect whether something is AI generated, and maybe the platforms should step in and have disclaimers. This piece of content was written by AI. Maybe that's an interesting exercise, but I don't know how you police that.
Yeah, well, this is a much broader debate, but I agree. I think the genie's out of the bottle. I think when you look at code now on GitHub, nearly 50% of all code on GitHub in the last 8 months, and it's only been 8 months, is now produced by AI. I think content will be the same. If you now took a straw poll, and there isn't anyone done this analysis, but if you looked at all content from professional content creators, I would say a reasonable proportion is either AI enabled, as in it's been aided by ChatGPT or something of that nature, or is fully produced. I'd say there's a reasonable proportion of content that's being created now. I think that's going to accelerate and accelerate and accelerate. I don't think it's a good thing, but there are bigger questions around, to your point, platform ethics. Do we have watermarks in all AI generated? I think that's a must. I think that's 100%, in the same way we have hashtag ad as a disclaimer that I have been sponsored to talk about something online. I think we're going to have disclaimers and watermarks as a consequence. The challenge you have is this is so democratized now that people aren't going to follow the rules. So it is the platform's responsibility to identify and flag these things. Because if you put the onus on the individual, young, impressionable 16-year-old in their bedroom, just, churning this stuff out at scale, they're going to do their thing. And I don't actually blame them, right? They don't know better. So I do think the platforms have a bigger responsibility. And then the broader debate around regulation itself. But I want to take a step, because we could talk for days on AI, and I'm just conscious of time right now. We mentioned before we kicked this off, we wanted to talk about LinkedIn. Not LinkedIn, we wanted to talk about company announcements. You were kindly saying that when Flight Story make an announcement, you see it in 5 different places. How should organizations and companies be thinking about announcements from your perspective? And then I'll give you my take on how we approach whenever we launch a new service or have something to say in the world.
I think your job as a marketer is to make people care about what you're doing and to make people aware of what your company is doing. And it's very difficult to do that. Most days people don't really care about what you're doing. Why should they? So when you have a big milestone, or you have a big product launch, or some kind of announcement as a company, it's like, holy shit, this is your opportunity. You have an excuse to make as much noise as possible. And usually your audience probably do care about the thing you're announcing. And so brands should really never underestimate the power that they have in those moments. And they should be using these kind of announcements to maximize their media opportunity as much as possible. It's a kind of philosophy we've adopted, that whenever we have a big company milestone, when we raise a round of funding, when we do a partnership with one of our investors, when we launch a new product, we will go above and beyond, create a huge launch video that's very polished, very cinematic. We will distribute it in 10, 15 different places. We will work with creators to amplify that content. We've worked with media partners to distribute it on newsletters. We want to get it in as many places as possible, because we see these moments as opportunities to kind of put our head above the water every now and then, and constantly remind people we exist. What it also allows us to do is it allows us to attach ourselves to some kind of cultural moment or some kind of story within the industry. So whenever we have like a big announcement, we don't just announce the thing. We've launched this or we've done this. We will tell a story about what this announcement means in the broader context of the industry. So, like, for example, when we raised our Series A last year, we didn't just say, "Hey, we raised our Series A." We actually talked about the state of the industry, how the industry was growing despite people's expectations. So at the time, crypto, we're building blockchain tools, and crypto had just had a big crash, but our tool was actually growing. And so we told this wider story of how, despite the industry looking bad and despite markets looking bad, actually developer activity is on the rise and people are building more stuff. So we were able to tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
And then us launching our Series A was almost like this qualifier for that narrative. And it just allows us to kind of, it's a huge opportunity to tell a story, to attach ourselves to that story, to that cultural moment, and then just make a big splash. And if you understand how to do that, these kind of announcement moments are huge opportunities, and actually the only opportunity you're going to get to make a big noise. So you need to really maximize them. And I'd have to ask the same question to you, because I think you guys do a great job of it as well.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't agree more with everything you're saying. And it was interesting the way you described, we spoke earlier about virality. You basically just described the virality principles.
Yeah.
Bigger topic, attach yourself to it. Steer into an emotion, fear, in the context of, crypto bear market. You steered into that fear. And then you had this compelling narrative that was juxtaposed to fear, which was actually builders are still building. You were providing hope and positivity. And everything you described, creators, team, everybody getting engaged with that narrative, that's distribution within the concept itself. So, yeah, those three principles couldn't be more true. And we apply that ourselves. I think in a practical sense, it's really hard for companies, to your point, to get people to care about anything. We used to have this rule that was no one cares about you as much as you care about you. And what we meant in that, it sounds harsh, but there is truth in that. But there is also a freeing, liberating understanding within that whole framework. This idea that you don't care about me as much as I care about me means if I want to get your attention, I have to behave and act and in a certain way, right? So I think that was an understanding from us from a creative standpoint. And then in a practical sense, we just make it really easy for everybody to share and contribute. So in the run up to a service launch or an announcement of magnitude, we communicate in advance that this is the day that it's going to happen in the organization. We make a bit of a celebration around it, like we toast, we make it a bit of a, so we're in this together type moment. We then give everybody the tools and copy that they have an opportunity to lift. If you lower the barrier for people to share by giving them a great piece of creative, by giving them the copy, they'll add their own spin to it and flavor to it. And then we're very explicit around a specific time that we're all going to talk about this. We almost treat our announcements with these like mini internal embargoes where we say 8 a.m. we're going to drop this on this specific day. And we make it a moment. And most of the time, the feedback I get is very much what you say. Obviously, we have proximity bias. We share a lot of the same network. So it's probably well understood that you would see the content that we produce. But I hear this a lot. I go into a meeting with a person I've never met before. Is like, I see you guys on LinkedIn all the time. And I just go, fantastic. That was the plan. That's the first thing people say. So our content marketing is working. And a lot of that is geared around trying to create what we call moonshots. And moonshots can be activations, they can be launches, they can be just interesting things we're doing. But we call them a moonshot because we're gearing real concentrated efforts of distribution around them. And it just starts with being practical and giving and enabling your teams. And as you scale, your impact gets greater, right? So when we used to do moonshots at the start of the company, they had very different impact to now there's 120 people in the business. Now the kind of systems that we adopted very early on and now are living on, and they're creating even more impact. So it becomes a well understood winning strategy in many respects.
Couldn't agree more.
Cool. Let's wrap up and conclude, my man. And as always, I says as always, like we've been doing this forever, but I want to finish on a contested point, a controversy of the week, as I'm going to call it. And I'm just going to say something to you, and I want you to tell me if I'm right, wrong. Just give me your first reaction. The metaverse is dead. What do you think about that?
The metaverse was never really alive in the first place. I think I've spoken about this before. I think there was a a general misunderstanding of what the metaverse actually was and what it is. It's a very kind of vague term, which I believe many people decided its definition based on Mark Zuckerberg's keynote and Meta's kind of rebrand to Meta. And it became this like idea that one day we were going to have this virtual world that we all live in, that we work in, that we see our friends in, and we all sit around with virtual headsets living in the metaverse. I think what the metaverse is trying to capture is this kind of moment in time where our digital lives are becoming as important as our physical lives to many people. And we are spending more and more time in digital spaces. And some people are spending more time in digital spaces than physical spaces, particularly the younger generations. And the metaverse just really captures a series, a collection of platforms and tools that we spend our time on. Social media platforms, maybe they will be AR, virtual reality platforms as well. Maybe they will be, other kind of platforms that we can't really imagine yet. And people were seeing it, people were mistaking that for one single place. Actually, it's a collection of places. And you could argue that right now we are living in the metaverse. We are spending time on digital platforms. We talk to our friends on digital platforms. We work purely, people who are working remotely are certainly spending most of their days on digital platforms. And the metaverse just kind of captures a new way of thinking about digital space and digital lives. And you can then talk about how kind of crypto and Web3 plays into that. I think people like to envisage a world where, we have a financial system in this world. We have items and things that we collect in this world. And that's where I think Web3 has a part to play. But yeah, I don't know if it's ever, you could say it's dead, because I don't think we ever really had a good grasp on what the concept really meant in the first place.
I'm going to do something I haven't done at this moment. I'm just going to agree and say you articulated it beautifully. The metaverse will only live at the point where it doesn't suck. And like the idea and the ideas of the metaverse that have been presented to us so far felt dull, boring, inhumane. And until we have this immersive experience that is better than the real world, which I don't think we will, until that happens, I'm quite happy with what we have right now.
Agreed.
Good stuff. Good way to conclude. Thank you, dude, and we'll chat next week.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed watching or listening to this, please like and subscribe. It means a hell of a lot to us. This is fuel for us to continue doing this. So thank you.